Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tuning into something really fundamental in music, scales and modes.
Yeah, the basic frameworks. The text we're drawing from has this great line calling scales ladders upon which melodies ascend or descend.
I liked that. It really captures it. So we're basically going to unpack how these musical building blocks, fit together.
Exactly. And we'll start with, arguably, the most important foundation in Western music.
Okay, so first step on that ladder,
No.
the diatonic scale. That's the 7-note scale, right? With the specific pattern. Whole, whole, half.
Whole, half, whole, half. That's the one. WWH, WWWH.
Right. And the source material suggests this isn't just like made up randomly. It connects to the physics of sound, something about overtones.
That's a really key idea here. When you play a note, you get the main sound, but also these quieter, higher sounds, the overtones. And the relationships between those overtones, well, they seem to influence what our ears find pleasing or consonant.
Interesting. So it's almost built into the sound itself.
In a way, yeah. And what's fascinating, is the text points out, is you see this same basic pattern or variations of it pop up in really old music systems. Think ancient Greek modes, even Indian ragas.
Wow. So it's not just a Western thing originally.
It suggests something pretty universal about how we perceive musical relationships.
And the classic example everyone knows is C major, right? C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C.
The default setting, almost. And our text links it to feelings like joy, brightness.
Yeah, you can hear that. It feels open, resolved, but the text stresses C major is just one place to start that pattern.
Absolutely. You can build that WWH pattern starting on any note.
So the diatonic scale, it's like picking just 7 notes out of the 12 available notes in an octave.
Exactly, out of the full chromatic scale. And those 7 are chosen because they work well together. They create a kind of harmonic logic.
It gives you structure then, like limiting the notes creates the key.
Right. It establishes a tonal center, a home base. But even with that limit, there's just immense freedom for melodies and harmonies.
Okay, so from that diatonic foundation, we get to maybe the 2 most common flavors in Western music, major and minor scales.
Yeah, the text calls them 2 sides of the same coin, which I think is a really helpful way to put it.
How so? They use the same notes.
They often use the same set of 7 notes in the diatonic scale, yeah. But the arrangement, the starting point, and crucially, the interval structure, that's what makes them feel so different.
Let's take the major scale first. C major again. C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. We said bright, uplifting. Where does that feeling come from?
A lot of it is down to the interval between the first note, the tonic C, and the third note, the E. That's a major third. That interval tends to sound stable, clear, resolved. It gives the whole scale that character.
Okay. Then the flip side is the natural minor scale. The text uses A minor, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A. That's the relative minor of C major. Uses the same notes but starts on A.
Exactly. And its pattern is different. Whole, half, whole, half, whole.
And the feeling is totally different. The text says sad, introspective.
Right. And a big part of that feeling comes from the interval between its tonic, A, and its third note, C. That's a minor third. So it's a smaller interval than the major third, and it often carries that sense of melancholy or tension.
But it's not just one minor sound, is it? The source talks about variations, harmonic and melodic minor.
Yeah, this is where it gets interesting. Musicians needed slightly different versions of minor for different jobs, basically. Harmony versus melody.
So the harmonic minor, A, B, C, E, E, F, G sharp, A, it raises that 7th note, the G, to a G sharp. Why do that?
Well, the main reason is harmonic. That raised 7th note, the G sharp, acts as a leading tone. It creates a much stronger pull back up to the tonic, the A.
Ah, okay. For making endings sound more final, like in cadences.
Precisely. It gives you a stronger VI cadence, which is super important in minor keys. But there's a side effect.
Oh.
Raising that G sharp creates this larger gap, an augmented second, between the 6th note, F, and the 7th, G sharp. And the text points out this interval can sound quite distinctive, sometimes described as exotic or dramatic.
You definitely hear it. It has a certain spice.
It does. So then you get the melodic minor, which tries to smooth things out, especially for singing or playing melodies.
How does that one work? It goes up one way and down another.
Kinda, yeah. When you're going up the scale, you raise both the 6th and 7th notes. So A, B, C, D, E, F, G sharp, Re.
Okay, why raise the 6th as well?
Raising the F to F sharp avoids that awkward, augmented second jump between F and G sharp we just talked about. It makes the upward line flow much more smoothly.
Gotcha, more singable.
Exactly. But then, often, when the melody comes down, composers revert back to the natural minor form, A, G, F, E, D, C, B, A.
Huh. So it keeps that smoother sound going up, but retains the more characteristic natural minor sound going down.
That's the common practice, yeah.
Yeah.
It shows how these scales adapted, to serve both the needs of harmony of the chords and melody of the lines.
It's amazing how these small tweaks, raising a note here or there, create such different emotional palettes. Major feels confident, minor feels like yearning.
Absolutely. That distance between the tonic and the third note really sets the initial mood. It's fundamental.
Okay, so moving beyond just major and minor, the text then gets into musical modes.
Right. And these are fascinating because, as the text explains, they actually predate the time when major and minor became totally dominant.
Older systems, like
Yeah,
connected to ancient Greece and medieval music.
exactly. They have deep historical roots. Essentially, there are 7 modes, and each one can be thought of as starting on a different degree of the diatonic scale.
So you take the C major scale notes, C, D, E, F, G, B, but instead of starting on C, you start on D or E or F, etc.
That's the concept. And because you're starting in a different place within that same WWWWWH pattern, the sequence of whole and half steps relative to your new starting note changes.
Ah, I see. So the intervals from the new tonic are different for each mode.
Precisely. And that gives each mode its own unique character, its own distinct flavor.
Let's run through them quickly then. The first one, starting on C, is Ionian. The text says that's just.
The same as the major scale. Bright, happy, familiar.
Okay, then starting on the second note, D, in our C major example, you get Dorian, minor quality.
Yeah, it's technically a minor mode because it has a minor third, but the text notes it's often felt as less sad than the regular natural minor, which is Aeolian. It has maybe a more melancholy but strong feel. Folk music often uses it.
Interesting. And the third degree, E, gives us Phrygian.
Right. Also a minor, but the really distinctive thing here is the lowered second degree. So in E Phrygian, using the notes of C major, you'd have EF right at the start. That half step gives it that exotic, sometimes described as Spanish-sounding flavor the text mentions.
Yeah, that flattened second is very noticeable. Okay, fourth degree, F, gives Lydian.
Lydian is a major mode, but it has a raised fourth degree compared to the standard major scale. F Lydian, using C major notes, would be F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F. That raised B gives it what the text calls a dreamy and ethereal quality, very floaty sounding.
Raised fourth. Okay, fifth degree G is Mixolydian.
Mixolydian. This one's major, but with a lowered seventh degree. G Mixolydian is G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. That flattened seventh gives it a sort of bluesy, dominant feel. The text says bluesy and bright, very common in rock and blues.
Right, that dominant seventh sound. Okay, sixth degree, A. That's Aeolian.
And Aeolian, as the text confirms, is just another name for the natural minor scale we already discussed. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A. Sad, introspective.
Got it. And finally, the seventh degree B gives Locrian. This one sounds tricky.
It is. Locrian is unique because the triad built on its tonic is diminished, BDF in this case. It contains a tritone interval right there in the basic chord. The text called it unstable and dissonant.
So you don't build songs around Locrian very often?
Not typically as the main tonal center, no. It's very tense. But these other modes, Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, Mixolydian, they offer these really distinct colors that go beyond simple major and minor.
And they're still used, not just historical things.
Oh, absolutely. Folk music, jazz improvisation relies heavily on modes. Even some modern pop and rock consciously use modal flavors. They're like a window into an older sound world, but also tools for new expression.
So that's expanding the palette within the diatonic framework just by shifting the focus. But what about going outside of those 7 notes? That brings us to chromaticism, right?
Exactly. Chromaticism is all about using notes that don't belong to the main diatonic scale of the key you're in.
Adding extra colors, basically.
That's a great way to put it. The text explains it adds color, yeah, but also
Raised fourth.
tension.
Yeah.
It really expands the emotional range.
And the chromatic scale itself is just all the notes, all 12.
Yep, all 12 notes within the octave, moving just by half steps. C, C sharp, D, D sharp, E, S, and so on.
So unlike the diatonic scale with its clear home base, the chromatic scale sounds floaty, ambiguous.
Very much so. It doesn't really have a strong tonal center. That constant half-step movement creates instability, fluidity, and composers use this deliberately.
For what kind of effects? The text mentions a few uses.
Well, one is adding harmonic color, using chromatic chords, chords that borrow notes from outside the key to create surprise or richness.
Okay.
Another big one is creating tension. Chromatic notes often create dissonance, a clash that wants to resolve, building anticipation or drama.
Makes sense.
It can also make melodies more expressive, less predictable, more winding. And crucially, as the text highlights, chromaticism is really important for modulation.
Changing keys smoothly.
Yeah, using chromatic notes often helps to pivot or bridge between one key area and another. It's a powerful tool for adding complexity and blurring the lines of a single key.
So it's like deliberately coloring outside the lines of the diatonic scale for specific effects.
You got it. Which leads us to maybe a more subtle but equally fundamental topic, our source covers, tuning systems, how we actually decide the precise pitch of all these notes.
Right, just intonation versus equal temperament. This sounds technical, but the text suggests it really affects the sound.
It absolutely does. Let's start with just intonation. The text describes it as being based on simple whole number mathematical ratios between frequencies.
Like the octave is a 2.1 ratio, the perfect fifth is 3.2. These come from the overtone series we mentioned earlier.
Exactly. They're derived from those natural acoustic relationships. And the result, particularly for consonant intervals like fifths and thirds, is that they sound incredibly pure, very smooth, resonant.
Sounds perfect. What's the catch?
The catch, and it's a big one, is that these pure intervals only really work perfectly in one specific key. Because the ratios are fixed, if you try to play the same music starting on a different note, modulating, some of those intervals will start to sound quite noticeably out of tune.
So perfect in one key, but not flexible.
Pretty much. Which is why, for most complex Western music written since the Baroque era, we use equal temperament.
Okay, so what's different about equal temperament?
Equal temperament takes the octave and divides it into 12 exactly equal semitones, or half steps. The ratio for each half step is the 12th root of 2, which is mathematically equal, but not a simple whole number ratio.
So unlike just intonation's pure ratios, these intervals are slightly off.
Compared to the pure ratios, yes. Every interval except the octave is technically slightly out of tune in equal temperament. A perfect fifth isn't exactly 3.2, a major third isn't exactly 5.4.
That sounds worse. Why do we use it?
Because they are equally out of tune, or rather equally tempered, in every single key.
So the compromise is you lose that absolute purity.
But you gain the massive advantage of being able to play music in any key and modulate freely between keys without anything sounding terribly wrong or jarringly out of tune.
I see. So it makes complex harmony and key changes possible, which became really central to Western music.
Exactly. The text frames it as a trade-off. The absolute purity of just intonation within one key versus the incredible flexibility of equal temperament across all keys.
And equal temperament won out, mostly for practical reasons.
It did. It was a necessary adaptation for the direction music was heading, even though, as the text notes, it represented a move away from those naturally occurring pure ratios of the overtone series.
Wow. Okay, this has been quite a journey. From the basic steps of the diatonic scale through major and minor, the different flavors of the modes, adding chromatic color, and now even how the notes themselves are tuned.
It really covers the fundamental architecture, doesn't it? These frameworks, scales, modes, tuning, they underpin almost everything we hear in Western music.
They really do. And thinking about that last point, the tuning, it raises a question for me, maybe for you listening too. Considering that trade-off, between the pure sound of just intonation and the flexibility we get now, how much does that subtle difference in tuning actually affect the emotional impact?
That's a fascinating thought. Would a piece played in perfectly tuned intervals but limited to one key feel fundamentally different emotionally than the same piece played in our familiar equal temperament?
Does that slight imperfection we're used to actually contribute to the character of the music we know?
Or thinking about scales as frameworks. If we started exploring scales that don't follow the diatonic pattern, or tuning systems that divide the octave differently, what completely new kinds of sounds, new emotional landscapes might open up.
Yeah, what sonic possibilities are still out there, outside our usual frameworks? It definitely makes you want to listen more closely.
Absolutely. So maybe next time you're listening to music, try and hear these things. Is it major? Minor? Can you catch a hint of a mode, maybe some chromaticism? How is it all put together?
Because, as our source puts it so well, understanding these structures isn't just about sound. It touches on how we organize thought and emotion through music. There's always another layer to explore.